Now I will talk briefly about Milton's life and works. John Milton is known as one of the very greatest and most influential of English poets, ranking with Geoffrey Chaucer and William Shakespeare. He wrote both poetry and prose. In poetry, he wrote pastoral, elegy, epic, drama, sonnet, and other kinds. Milton is best known for his epic, Paradise Lost, which is the greatest epic in the English language, and has been one of the central texts of English literature since its publication in 1667. Professor Leon Riken from Wheaton College says, if readers of English literature know just one epic, it is Paradise Lost. John Milton was born into a prosperous, middle-class Puritan family. His father was a scrivener, a recorder of property deeds and titles. The family was highly cultured, for his father was also a fine musician, composer who gained some recognition among his contemporaries. His mother, Sarah Milton, was the daughter of a merchant sailor. His family was wealthy enough to afford a second house in the country. Milton was a child prodigy, whose father gave him the best education imaginable. St. Paul's School, private tutors, Cambridge University, and 5 years after the college for self-education. As a result, Milton is the most learned of English writers. From 1618 to 1620, Milton was privately tutored at home. He then attended St. Paul's School, one of the famous grammar schools of the Renaissance, located right in Milton's neighborhood. Because of the family's financial standing, Milton received an excellent education in Greek, Latin, Hebrew, French, and Italian. Music and literature were particular favorites with the boy, and Milton began writing poetry at a young age. From 1625 to 1632, Milton studied in Christ's College, Cambridge University, where he was called Harvenscore, the Lady of Christ's, for his handsome face, delicate appearance, and lofty but unpretentious bearing. During his Cambridge period, while considering himself destined for the ministry, he began to write poetry in Latin, Italian, and English. On leaving Cambridge in 1632 with a master's degree, Milton had given up his original plan to be a priest. He went to live at Horton, his family's country retreat. He remained there for 6 years, pursuing a diligent course of reading and writing in order to prepare himself to be a great poet. Milton's first published poem was On Shakespeare, an epitaph printed in second folio of Shakespeare's plays. From 1632 to 1638, Milton wrote L'Allegro, Il Penseroso, Comers, and Listers. L'Allegro, from the Italian meaning the cheerful man, is the poetic expression of a happy state of mind. Il Penseroso, the melancholy man, is the poetic expression of a quiet and thoughtful mood that verges on sadness. These two sister poems describe the events of two different days in the life of a typical scholar, presumably Milton himself, in two contrasting moods. The two poems have a simplicity and grace characteristic of some of the best Elizabethan poetry. Comus is a short musical play reflecting a noble youth whose way lies open and smiling before him. Lycidas is a pastoral elegy, memorizing Edward King, a Cambridge student who had drowned. In 1638, Milton traveled to France and then to Italy, where he met many leading men of letters in Florence, Rome, and Naples, including Galileo, the Italian astronomer and physicist. Milton returned to England in 1639 and soon became involved in the religious debates of the day. His inclination was toward Puritan party. The Puritans found the Church of England too broad and too Catholic in using a rich liturgy and vestments. They wished to purify the Church from within on the basis of scriptural principles and to do away the bishops and the support of the Church by state. There was a power struggle during the 1630s between King Charles and his Parliament. After the Long Parliament of 1640, the king was deprived of some of his power, and the Parliament undertook church reform along Puritan lines. In 1642, the parliamentary party demanded control of the army, the private councillors, and even the education of the king's children. It is curious that Milton, a strong Puritan, married in 1642 Mary Powell, a member of a royalist family, whose support of the king was in opposition to Milton's support of the Puritan and parliamentary cause. But Mary Powell left Milton after a very short time to visit her family. A visit was to continue for 3 years, partly because Mary wanted to stay with her family, and partly because the Civil War made it quite difficult for her to return to London. But in 1645, Mary did return and bore her husband 3 daughters and a son, who died in infancy. She herself died in 1652 in giving birth to the 3rd of the daughters. In 1656, Milton married again, and this time to Catherine Woodcock, who he loved very much, but she died also in childbirth, less than 15 months later, and her child lived only a month. One of Milton's most beautiful sonnets on his deceased wife commemorates their brief marriage. Milton's 3rd and last marriage in 1663 to Elizabeth Minshull was very frankly a marriage of convenience. The poet, who had been blind by then for 11 years, needed someone to run his household and help rear his 3 daughters. Milton's first volume of poems was published in 1645. The volume is of major importance because it includes both Comus and Lycidas, 2 of Milton's great works. But the next period of Milton's life was devoted not to poetry he loved, but to the duty he felt to be more immediately pressing, the duty of doing what he could do to establish and maintain the Puritan Commonwealth. The first phase of the Civil War had ended in 1645 with the defeat of Charles I. but hostilities were renewed in 1648, and in 1649 Charles I was beheaded. And in that same year, Milton was engaged as Latin Secretary to the Council of State of the Commonwealth, a council which Oliver Cromwell headed. Since Latin was the language of diplomacy in the 17th century, Milton became Cromwell's Secretary for Foreign Tongues and became involved in pamphlet wars, which he found sometimes demeaning and always time-consuming. Milton became a political writer, advocating freedom of divorce, freedom of the press, and freedom from what he considered tyranny. Areopagitica, Milton's impassioned defense of freedom of the press, was the greatest of his prose works, but it was against Cromwell's government rather than in its behalf, and it was ignored in Milton's day. It was during his service to Cromwell that Milton became blind. This disability came upon him gradually, but Milton did not allow it to interfere with the heavy reading and writing that his position demanded. By 1652, however, he was totally blind. His sonnet, "When I Consider," records his fear that he will never be able to use his God-given gift for poetry again. But the poem ends with his acceptance of the fact that what God wants of him is obedience and resignation. He can also serve God, even he cannot write poetry, for they also serve, who only stand and wait. In 1658, Cromwell died and was succeeded by his son, Richard, who was quite incapable of ruling in his father's stead. Thus, in 1660, Charles II of the House of Stuart, the son of Charles I, whom Cromwell had beheaded, was restored to the English throne. Milton's life was in very real danger, and he was for a short time imprisoned. After his release, he lived in disillusionment and bitterness. Milton was alienated from the most powerful elements of the society of the time because the Stuarts and their followers stood for the institutions he had fought against most of his life, the monarchy and the episcopacy. This last period of his life, however, was his most creative, for it was during these years in which he felt himself to be the prophet who had failed, the man of the law to whom no one listened, that he had completed his greatest works, Paradise Lost, Paradise Regained, and Samson Agonistes. In 1667, he published Paradise Lost, which fulfilled his dream of writing a national epic. Milton died in November 1674. His funeral was attended by all his learned and great friends in London.